We waiting on anybody else to come? It is 5:32. Call this meeting of the City Council to order. If you can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll proceed next to roll call. Clerk Treasurer Aldridge.
Carolyn Pearson, present. Richard Traeger,
Present.
Dale Seward,
Here.
Mike Shockley.
Here. All right, so we're going to start out with an update and then we'll proceed to the public hearing. We'll start out first with Butler, Fairman, and Cypher regarding the phasing of the project, estimated construction costs, and the purpose of each element of each phase. So, Mr. Smith or Spidell, Fran? All right, Mr.
And I also have a sign-in sheet for the public hearing that I can send around. So it's a public hearing for the preliminary engineering report, also commonly referred to as the PER. We have broken the project into two phases. Phase one would be anticipated construction in 2019. Phase two would be construction in 2020. The first phase would be new well number 7 at the golf course, hydrogen sulfide removal equipment, a tank and booster station at Carrollton Road, well 3 to well 5 water main piping, and well 7 to the system water main piping. That phase one construction costs are estimated at $5,315,000. Phase two construction, Armory Road tank and booster. This is a redundant tank at Armory Road, needed in order to take the existing tank out of service in order to maintain it. The Hilltop and Deer Creek tank rehabilitation. Similarly, without these improvements, those tanks have not been able to be taken offline, provide required painting and maintenance. And then the last aspect of the phase two will be Prince William Loop water main. The connection of water main from the new improvements at Carrollton Road to the Armory Road booster station. Phase two, 2020 construction is estimated at $6.56 million. That's a quick technical overview. Preliminary engineering report is on file at City Hall. We welcome any questions. There is a five-day comment question period. Those comments can be directed to my attention, and then we will respond to those in writing.
Does common council have any questions for Mr. Spidell? I did see one thing when I was reviewing the population. Maybe switch the name.
I didn't see on the agenda that it said this was a hearing.
It didn't, but I think the next document I provided showed the notice of public hearing. That was printed with comment in 2 weeks.
So what I noticed in there, in the info we were given, was some grants were going to be explored for phase 2. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I think Mr. Julian can probably speak to that better.
Why is it phase 2 and not phase 1?
Kind of side of thing. Mr. Julian, would you like to?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is John Julian. I'm a partner with Unlaw. We've been helping with the development of the financial plan. I'll go right to the question at hand. There are limited, very specific grant programs that the city would be eligible to participate in. Each of those programs, well, the most common program is the OKRA grant program with a maximum grant amount of $600,000. It is an application, a competitive application process, which each community puts forth their story as to why they're requesting the grant. And then there's a review cycle and a determination made as to whether you're going to be successful in being awarded a grant. Because of the process, there's only certain times of the year that you can make application, and only certain times in which those decisions are made. The next funding round would be after the first of the year in 2019. And then there'll be usually at least a second one more funding application available for 2019. The rules associated with that program are very precise in terms of when you can incur costs. And because of those restrictions and the funding cycle, you would be looking at delaying the start of your project here at least 6 months, if not 12 months, to participate in that program. Because the dollar amount is fixed, and because you can only get one grant per project, it makes sense to bifurcate your project into 2 phases, which would allow you to still maximize your grant amount, but you would be doing it for the second phase. I mentioned there are 2 programs. The second program is a federal program. It again is a competitive process. It's administered through the U.S. Department of Agricultural Rural Development, and it has its requirements as well in terms of when you apply, when they make decisions, when those dollars are available. It is a federal program, and I know as soon as we think federal programs, we think everything's going to happen very quickly. That was a sarcastic remark. It's even slower than the state OKRA program, but it lends itself to the second phase project. And I know the expectation or the hope is to do the second phase on the heels of the first phase, meaning 2020 construction. I would hope, but I wouldn't say I would expect to be able to get through the RD application award process and still be in construction in 2020. I'll be frank with you, it's a cumbersome program. I don't think anybody would deny that. It's a program that you probably only want to go through if you're going to get meaningful grant dollars. Because while you're waiting for those determinations of grant dollars, time is going by, and time is going to cause this project to become more expensive. The engineers can speak to this more intelligently than I can, but construction inflation is something we're seeing occur in a pattern that's more consistent with history. The last 10 years, it's been relatively steady, but we're starting to see inflationary costs catching up. And when we're talking about a project of this magnitude, adding 5-6% annually to a multi-million-dollar project neutralizes the value of a grant. So you need to get a fair amount of grant on a fairly quick basis, or you're gonna take one step forward and 2 steps back. Didn't mean to drag on with an answer, but because you're looking at breaking this into 2 steps, it really gives you the best of both worlds. You can go after those grants, logically pursue those, and make your decisions based upon how those responses come in for the second phase, while still being able to lock into some better interest rates for part of the project with the current contract.
What's the maximum on the USDA grant?
They won't give you a maximum per, but just to give you a sense, maybe to make this worthwhile, you should be looking at $1 million or $2 million in grant at least, to make it worthwhile.
Why have we not started that until now?
Can't answer that question directly. There are a lot of factors going into play, but you need to know what you're going to be doing before you can ask for the money. And I think it was until just recently that a decision was made as to the various scopes of the project that you're going to pursue. So timing is probably lining up with when the decision was made on the project.
How long have we been talking about bringing water into town? We started in 17. That's a year and a half, year and 8 months. You know,
It's been far
we
longer
haven't-
than that.
We haven't even discussed whether we can even get any bond money or anything. It has never been brought up or anything in all the meetings that we've had. Just in the paperwork I got Friday, the only time that the bond issue has been brought up has been in the second phase.
The bond or the grant?
Grant money rather, not bond, but grant money. The only time it's been brought up in all the material that we have been given, this council has been given. Grant money has only been brought up in our material that we've received, 100 some odd pages, which grant money was brought up in the second phase. I would like to know why, a year and a half later, that it has still only been brought up in the second phase.
Well, it's been brought up in meetings. We've been asking for it for
Well, I know that.
several
but we
months.
have not got any information from the gentleman or the lady presenting their case to take and put our water in. And I would like to know why that
You
is.
just stated we had to have our project proposal done, and we've just recently had that, before you can go after grants. You can't go after money unless you have your project.
That's not what I'm asking.
What
I'm
are you
asking, I understand we have to have certain things in place before you can go after the bond, after the grant. I understand that. I want to know why that we weren't told that this, and this is what we had to have in place before we could go after grant money. We were never told that, Dick.
No, I think we were. You've
No,
been
we
in
were not.
meetings. Yes, I think we were. We've discussed, it's been discussed a million times.
I know that there's a lot of details that go into these projects, and I'm not trying to make excuses or explain how things played out, but you do need to know the project that you're going after before you go for the grant. But more important than that is where we are today versus if we start the process of pursuing grants going forward, or whether you did that 18 months ago, really would not change the financial makeup at all. Because you're talking about the Okra grant is, the maximum you're gonna get is $600,000. Whether you got that $600,000 for the first phase or the second phase, it's the same $600,000, you're not getting anything more than that. So that financially doesn't impact you on the bottom line. The rural development grant is, who knows what that's going to be, but it's not going to be half of this $13, $14 million project. It's going to max, there's only so much grant money that's going to be available both in the state and nationwide. Project this side, you're gonna be competing, going through the national office. That means you're competing with not only the applicants from Indiana, but you're competing with the applicants on a national basis. They're not going to give a big chunk of their pool. I think and I'll confess, I don't do a lot of rural development, because people don't do a lot of rural development, because it's kind of a pain in the neck. But I think the pool of grant dollars for the state, for the whole state, is $5 million. I think that's, I don't know, you guys know, I mean, is it in that range? So they're not gonna give you $5 million and not give everything else in the state. So what I want you to know is, you know, if you go after the RD grant money and you get it, that's great. But whether you started that process a year and a half ago or you started today, the amount you're gonna get isn't gonna change. The chances of getting it don't go up. You don't have a better story to tell if you started talking with them a year and a half ago versus today, because they won't get excited about your project until you tell them what you want to build. So I can understand your interest, or what's in the best for your citizens here, and getting the most grant money is certainly on the list of trying to get what's best for the citizens. I can tell you, you're not in any worse position today in going after grants, starting now, than if you started that process 18 months ago. You're going to end up in the same spot.
As the interest rate went up, we have not heard that either, whether it went up or down from 2%, where did it go?
That's,
I guess we'll have John talk about update on SRF funding, interest rate and bond length, impact on rates and phasing, and then exploration of grants for phase 2. You get to talk a lot about grants, but
yeah.
We'll go ahead and have him say what he's going to say, then we can ask questions after that.
Thank you.
You guys decide.
Let me, if I can, not to go to your question, I'll get to your question.
Yeah.
But just to try to kind of put more information out there that'll probably prompt some other questions, let me just talk a little bit about the borrowing process. I'm here with Patty Zellmer from Ice Miller, the attorney that drafts the legal documents for borrowing money, is here. She's going to cover some of this. I'm going to start off by saying, in collaboration with Patty, I gave her information to draft that ordinance that allows you to borrow money from really all the different options that are available to you. We talked about rural development a minute ago. We talked about SRF on a number of occasions, and the other option that you have for borrowing money is would be known as an open market sale, which you've done in the past for some of your other projects. So those three options are the options available to you, and they're all available to you within the language that Patty drafted in the bond ordinance. And the reason you do that is you have a plan that you want to, how you want to fund this thing, but you want to be able to have plan A, plan B, plan C, okay? Plan A is the SRF program. So I'm going to talk about the details associated with that, because that's the expectation of how this project will be funded. The SRF is a program set up by the state to loan to communities like you for these type projects. It's been around for many years and has improved itself over the years a number of ways that are going to come up in this conversation in a minute. But what they have are two programs on how they lend money. The program that most people are familiar with is what they call their traditional program. I call it their subsidized interest program. And it makes 20-year loans available to communities. The interest rate would vary, but the interest rate for Delphi would be around 2%. So it would be a fixed rate for 20 years. That program does not have enough money to meet the demands for all the communities that apply for those dollars. So they have a second program that they call the pool program that has unlimited dollars available to borrow from, because what they do is the SRF goes out and sells their own bonds using the state's financial backing and credit rating to get the most attractive interest rates in the competitive market for their bonds. And they then just pass their cost of borrowing on to you to set their interest rate. So what I can tell you is that if we went to the traditional subsidized interest rate program, we would get a 2% loan. If we go to the pool program, we're going to get but in effect are AAA interest rates, but I can't tell you precisely what that is today because those bonds haven't been sold. Our working number is 3.25% for that 20-year, but that is not a guaranteed fixed rate, that's our working number. Okay. Now, I mentioned that the program has improved itself over the years. Just this year, they've opened up the opportunity to borrow for longer than 20-year time frame. When you're building infrastructure that has a useful life of 50+ years, it's not too worrisome to borrow for longer than 20 years. They're allowing the communities to ask to borrow money up to 35 years. And when you're doing the pool deal, because the state is borrowing the money and not leveraging off of some funding they get from the federal government, they have greater latitude in terms of how they structure that. All your costs can be funded in that program and paid out over 35 years. The working number for an interest rate for a 35-year pool borrowing is 4%. Okay? Now, to give you a feel of the difference between the 20-year financing and the 35-year financing, it's going to reduce your annual debt payments over 20%. Okay? So, you know, 20% is going to be noticeable on your water bill, that savings in interest rate. So our expectation is to participate in that pool program with the SRF under a 35-year financing, and our expectation is the interest rate would be around 4%. We've already talked about breaking this project into 2 steps. One of the advantages of doing that is I mentioned that pool program that has that 2% borrowing rate, but a 20-year repayment period, they maxed out. We didn't qualify for the funding range under that program, okay? If we had qualified and fallen into that funding range, they still had set a maximum per project for everybody in the state of $7 million. So we still would have had to borrow anything over $7 million from the pool program. So what we'll propose to do is, because we're breaking the construction into 2 steps, break the financing into 2 steps, do the first step through the 35-year pool program, so we think around the 4%. So about half of the project we funded through that. That'll put the remaining project in a lower dollar amount. Make it, nobody's going to guarantee anything because we still get into that application for the pool program, but we at least would have a loan amount that is in the range of what that maximum borrowing would have been this year to get the 2% money. Timing-wise, for the step, for the next step of the construction, matches very well with the SRF's timing for making decisions on their next funding round, which is next July. Okay, so what we would be looking at is the second phase of this project would be, you already got the PER in place, so it just rolls over. You're competing for roughly $7 million out of the subsidized traditional program. That decision would be made next July, which lines up with your timelines for second step of construction. I'll take any questions and try to answer them, but my last comments I want to make is, I said that pool program is available for anybody that wants to make that application. The only requirement is we have to be done with the legal process by October, okay? So one of the things that was distributed was a timetable that kind of lays out. That's driving that timetable to get us in a position to be able to participate in that pool program and complete the steps that we have to complete by October. So that's that. I told Patty that's what we have to do, and she backfed the dates that make that happen. So that's what's driving it. So as you look at that timetable, that means we're going to start the introduction of ordinances next month, and council taking final action on those ordinances in October. And it's not designed to try to do anything other than make sure we can participate in that 35-year borrowing because of the ultimate benefit that'll have on impact on rates and charges.
Why did we not qualify?
Competition. I'm not an expert in what they do behind the curtain in terms of that, but they had $50 million roughly in the funding. You had, I would say, do you guys remember, was it like 30 communities, 35 or so that made application? Maybe the top 15 to 18 qualified for some of that money. So it was a pretty competitive process. And I'm going to be careful, I'm going to hide behind the podium here as I say this. Your interest rate, or your water rates are pretty competitive. There are a lot of other communities that are starting with higher water rates than you have. And that is a great thing for the community, and I'm not downplaying that. But when you're competing for better terms of funding, that works as a negative.
So phase one, back to the beginning, is going to run around $5,315,000, right?
Construction costs.
So there's more to be added to that.
Yes, I mean, when you add in the engineering, the land cost, cost of issuance expense, and contingency, I would size that at a minimum about 6.3.
Okay. 6.3 million for phase one, which would include everything, give or take.
Right. The only thing well, I'm glad you're asking this question because the reason the ordinance is drafted the way it's drafted is to give the maximum amount, and we have some discretion in terms of how we would size that first bond issue versus second bond issue.
Mm-hmm.
Anything we do to position ourselves better for that second phase, being that 2% money, is not a bad thing. Particularly when we're looking at interest rates are moving up,
Mm-hmm.
and next year they're probably going to be higher than they are today. So,
But we don't know that for sure.
no, I don't.
Thank you.
But with my experience in the market and listening to people that are smarter than I am, the Fed continues to raise interest rates. It's expectation there'll be at least one more step this year, and they've adopted, I think, a pretty publicized financial plan of continuing to move interest rates higher. The market will follow that trend. So I can't predict what's gonna happen, but I can tell you what my expectation is, that interest rates will be higher next year. It's one of the factors that you want to take into consideration, because what you borrow today will be a fixed rate, it'll lock in for the full 35 years. So you do have engineering costs associated with the second step of this, the second phase of construction, and it might make sense to include at least some of that engineering expense in this borrowing to lock in to current interest rates. That's an administrative policy decision, but that would take what I said, it was 6.3 million. If you're going to fund any of that engineering, it would take that borrowing amount up.
So phase 2 comes in at 6.56 million, is that construction cost only?
Correct.
What do you estimate, with your experience, what do you estimate the total cost to be?
Working numbers are, engineering is around 865,000. Cost of issuance, I got another 150,000. Land acquisitions, maybe another 100,000. So that's another 1.2 million.
7.76 million total for phase 2, correct?
I didn't run the numbers, but I'll take your word for it.
Now, to finance phase 1, which is the booster construction in 2019, booster station, well 3 to well 5, well 7 to the system, and maybe some other stuff, which totals everything 6.3 million. You're looking at financing that with the pool program?
Correct.
Okay, so the pool program would finance phase 1. And that would come in on a 35-year loan
Correct.
at 4% interest. Is that correct?
Estimated.
Estimated.
Why is that better when you're paying 4% for 35 years? It doesn't seem better to me.
Well, when you run the numbers, you're gonna find the annual payment will be over 20% lower.
It's double the term. 20 years versus 35, it's double the term almost, and we're saving 20%. To me, as a businessman, that don't work.
Well, keep in mind, we're all familiar with inflation, right? The interest rate's locked in. If I was gonna tell you, I'm gonna pay you $1 today, or pay you $1 35 years from now, when do you want that dollar? You want it today, right? Because that dollar isn't gonna be worth as much 35 years from now. So keep that in mind, that payment is fixed, but as you're gonna pay that 35 years from now, when dollars are worth a lot less than they were today.
I'm a real estate, I understand that, but also understand we're paying for 2 bond issues here because we're 35 years. If we shorten those up, we'd be looking